The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hello everybody, and greetings from an unusually sunny England this afternoon. I'm Leanne Kaufman. I'm a member of SIM Alliance's communications team, and on behalf of SIM Alliance, I'd like to warmly welcome you to our 2017 SIM Market Insights webinar. Before handing you over to Stefan Frank, our board member who will be delivering today's presentation, I'd like to remind you that all data presented is based on SIM Alliance member shipments. I'd also like to quickly run through a few housekeeping points, which will hopefully help you to get the most out of today's session. Firstly, all attendees will remain muted during the session. This is just to reduce feedback and background noise. The presentation will be delivered in approximately 30 minutes. We've then allowed roughly 10 minutes for a Q&A session at the end. With regards to submitting questions, please feel free to do so through the presentation dashboard on your screen. All questions will be collected throughout the webinar, and while we'll try to answer as many as possible at the end, if we don't have time to answer all questions on the session, we will reply individually to you by email following the webinar. Please allow us up to a working week to do that, to collate an appropriate response for you. Now, I'll pass you over to Stefan to begin our presentation. Next slide, please, and over to you, Stefan.
Yeah, thanks very much, Leanne. Stefan Frank speaking. Thanks for the nice intro, and a warm welcome to all listening, to the audience. I think there's a lot of analyst and there's a lot of membership staff in this call, at least that was anticipated. And I assume that a lot of experts are there that have seen some information in the last years already. Just to anticipate a little bit the structure of today, we have prepared for you, I think, a fairly interesting deck. We really try to grab as much information as possible, which we deem in this context of performance of the industry as relevant. And so a lot of you might know why we think we are really a good source for information of the market is that with a range of 85 to 90%, so in this deck it says 88% of market coverage, we have really a very solid global base across all countries, some regions more or less, and others extremely dominant. And I think we have really a good base, and I will show you some further information for you to digest what is the basis that we use to do the kind of reporting on a quarterly basis. Just reflect and making clear, especially for those who are the first time in the call, we follow the classically set up blind process, which means members declare the actual quarterly deliverables to a neutral party, which is a lawyer who is making sure that none of the parties is getting insights into the source of the data. And this party is then aggregating the number and sharing this information across the members and also across the parties that have a subscription with the SIM Alliance. This is giving a much deeper insight into the market than we can share it with you here and in the press release to come up tomorrow. I think it's a good idea to give you an insight into how this structure looks. So maybe we jump to the next page. So just to indicate, the blue fields in general are the things that we share, and the green parts are the ones that we collect on a quarterly basis. So very small letters. I just guide you very quickly through to get an idea on how it looks. So you see, in general, our regional structure. So we have the region Americas, we have the region Asia, and CIS and EMEA. And you see that we have an accordingly well done breakdown to really get a good insight into respective parts. Because if you think about Asia, you can imagine that dynamics are extremely different between China, Australia, Indonesia, and therefore I think it makes sense to have there a little bit of deeper insight. Then you see the structure. It's a kind of product segmentation you see on the top. So more or less storage and capacity of the respective SIMs. You see at the bottom from left to right the cellular frequencies that are served. And you see the form factors which are making up of fairly well interest in the past, because you saw a lot of changes there compared to the fairly stable 2FF history that have been there in the 90s and 2000s. And then you have also an insight into some specific applications that are useful to be reported. So just this as an indication for you, if you're interested to get more, then please get into contact via the internet address and email address that you have seen on the top page. Next page, please. Easy slide, and luckily also good news. The market, even though having seen a lot of critical voices in the last years coming up, is still growing significantly, I think on a very high level. So 5.6 billion is the pieces amount that has been estimated to have been shipped worldwide for SIM Alliance members and non-SIM Alliance members. And our share here is on a very high level with 4.9 billion. That's making up for the 88% that you have just seen. Just a quick comment. We will deep dive on the details in a few secs, regionally, but also content-wise. Why is the number of SIM Alliance shipments static? You know that there's a lot of major, I would say, parameters and influences that has been shown up in the last years. For example, you know that the ID registration topic is a big one, especially in the industrialized market, but this is coming over now also to the emerging markets like Middle East. Then you have an M2M momentum, you have an IoT momentum, and all kinds of trends that are in this case obviously netting each other. So it's very difficult always to predict. It's very difficult to anticipate what's happening. But after all this year, it's like this. The next year it can be slightly different again. Overall, in any case, really good news. A very good and stable momentum on extremely high level. Next page, please. We summarized for you the most important aspects that we think in the context of business development, the context of SIM perspectives are key. The total available market we refer to, and for sure it's about an extremely increasing level of connectivity that we see all around. So as you know, it's not only the consumer anymore. We have extreme good traction in the automotive sector and the M2M sector. We will see this also how it splits across the regions. But what happens is that in line with the connected society, how it's often referred to, we see for sure an extreme increase of threats from the security perspective. So the guys that have looked into Europe the last year, they know about the WannaCry thing, they know about a lot of more things. And that led after all to an extremely interesting turnaround in how our industry and how our products are perceived and the demands. That's at least what I also myself perceived in the conferences I've been representing SIM Alliance in. Security is very often, meanwhile, at the forefront of the propositions of the token and not anymore connectivity only. And that's a general trend, I think, that is getting more and more traction with also not least in the context of the 5G discussion that has been led now for quite some years. And we see now in 2018, you see this in the middle up, first networks coming in. And there was very long, 2 years ago, there was a very hot debate between network providers, service providers, all kinds of stakeholders, if the SIM card has a role in 5G. And the reason why this debate has been led is that the focus was definitely on the authentication towards the network, but what has been completely neglected in the discussions, at least at these stages formally, was the security proposition. Meanwhile, the key stakeholders in the market have well understood the proposition, have well understood the relevance, especially if you think about 5G and in the context of IoT M2M. And actually, and we will see this in a few minutes, there is currently nearly no alternative for a solution that provides connectivity in the combination with security that scales as well, that is certifiable, and that has these kinds of propositions across interoperability and compatibility. M2M ramp up, as said, that's a result, more or less, not least on the demand in the market for certain players. We will see some at the end of this presentation and their view on it. And after all, and summing up on this intro slide, that's why we have seen a very good momentum and a very good interest also in new trends for what the SIM industry can do. And this is not limited only to the UICC. This is going far beyond in the UICC context, and the propositions that we have in terms of process knowledge, global reach in cooperation with the MNOs, but also, by the way, meanwhile, with other stakeholders, is a very good solid base for years to come. Please, next page. You see here the fairly well known, for those who follow us here regularly, the fairly well known breakdown of the 4.9 billion pieces that we can very concretely track where they have been shipped to versus the overall global market of 5.6. And maybe starting with the stable or contracting markets, I would see this in the middle of this chart as the contracting triangle. You see here Europe on a static level, still in absolute terms, very high number. If you compare it to the population, Middle East contracting, we will come to the details in a few secs. And CIS with a, let's say, fairly heterogeneous thing there, CIS having good momentum, but Russia and Ukraine contracting to a certain extent, which lead overall to a -2% development. On the edges of these slides, you have the growth champion in relative terms with +7 to 305 million units in North America. I will also show you some rationales and backgrounds on this one. And South America also, let's say, having the Brazilian share and then the rest of South America share with separate dynamics, but overall being positive, which is a turnaround compared to last year. And then Asia, our champion in absolute terms, having had 2% growth, which resembles an overall addition of 50 million compared to last year. So that's how the overall structure looks. And please remember the breakdown always sums up to the overall Similines numbers, because that's the only structure we can really follow piece by piece. Next page. So here we come now to our plus champions. Definitely strongest regional growth with the US in the forefront. And you see more or less the main reason for it is, and I think you follow it in the press anyway, and you follow it also from the regular press releases that are issued by the players, and especially by MNOs these days, and by some service providers. The M2M is really having a massive traction in the US market, and there's a lot of visions and a lot of players that already prepared since quite some time a very good and compelling end-to-end story. By the way, we also see in this market the most sophisticated and well-established IoT platforms. So there's a lot of players there which have well prepared to offer scalable platforms for the IoT environment and to get the connectivity done. And for sure, that is also helping us to develop the business there. The south side, as said, grows from the rest of South America, and let's say a little bit of defensive situation currently in Brazil. where you have a lot of economic and regulatory challenges that not least have also been fairly disappointing to the financial markets. But all in all, you see the sum is really impressive and a very good traction in this market. Please, let's flip to Asia. Here we have the champs in terms of relative growth and big absolute momentum. In China, you see this massive 25.5% growth. After all, you know that China has been more stable in the last years, a little bit contracting from the regulatory environment, but still there's two factors also in this market, and I think it's in parallel to US. It's definitely one of the most interesting M2M markets, maybe together with Japan. LTE, and we will see this in a minute, LTE is a massive thing there, and the M2M fantasies are also extreme. So we see a lot of things starting from the connected bicycle to the remote locker thing that are rolled out in masses. And for sure, the potential there is by far not exploited. So we expect this to continue also in future. India, stable on very high level. You remember that last year that has come back to the old sizes. So it's no wonder that on this level there's not, let's say, unlimited potential anymore. And India is also a market where LTE is doing a big rollout and is fueling a lot of the business upsides together with the starting momentum in the M2M. Japan, Korea, as said, you can imagine one of the, I think, globally most interesting mobile markets because they are extremely advanced and they are extremely open to innovation. That's for sure something that is supporting the numbers there. And after all, Indonesia also on extremely high level with a kick in from ID verification in the last quarter. But this is, let's say, something that we foresee to be also some interim phase, maybe until mid of this year, Q3 this year, and then there will be again, let's say, some kind of return to the old momentums. Overall, as said, extremely big market, 50 million additionally shipped from us alone. So really something that we see as very positive signals. Next page, please. Europe. I've roughly indicated already situation there. Western Europe for sure, a market where we see currently, at least if we drill deeper into also the qualitative factors, that the smartphone penetration is reaching very high levels. So we cannot expect, let's say, endless exchange of phones and endless exchange of form factors anymore there. But this is more or less replaced and maybe even outperformed then by new things like M2M. ID verification, we have seen this in many markets now. I've done some of this myself privately, and you see that it's very relevant how easy the video ident and how easy all the setup of the infrastructure is happening. In emerging markets, we will see a more impact because for sure there's challenges on the bandwidth, there's challenges on the equipment and on the smartphones. In the countries that we have referred to here, Italy, Germany, I think it's something that customers get used to very quickly, and we will see some, let's say, not major impacts there. CIS, I think Russia, Ukraine, no surprise, a little bit here on the minus part, but by far outperformed by all of the rest of the republic. So plus 58 on all the other republics is, I think, also a very positive indication. Middle East, interestingly, we have ID verification kicking in since mid of the year 2017. So that's something that, as said, is a little bit more sustainable here because it takes some time to get people used to it, and not everybody has the infrastructure ready. So and then we have for sure the very bad level of oil price and in some countries the economic challenges, which is not new, but with a, let's say, fairly high level of penetration, it's certainly showing up a little bit more than it would otherwise. Overall, a stable number on very high levels, and CIS and MIA with some potential downsides. Next page, please. That's the summary of the LTE perspective. Those of you who have participated in last year's call know the slide. We try to carve out the top 3 to 4 countries here. And what is very interesting, if you see the so far shipped number of 1.7 billion units overall with a plus of 21 in 2017, you see that how relevant the LTE with these 8 plus cards are in the markets. And you see also, looking at the champions here, Greater China, India, with a little bit of localized standards, which can be easily covered by us, and South America, North America, all in all, making up for close to and above 1 billion cards only on the LTE part. So this is really impressive, and I think to a certain extent this will continue for the next and ongoing year. Next, please. Just hinting to you that this is a chart that will not show up in any of the press release material, so maybe you have a good look from this perspective. Comparing the 2016 basis with the 2017 status quo, you see that the 2FF in blue and the gray micro SIM 3FF have continued to be shifted towards the nano, and especially also towards the famous triple SIM. So this is really a success story. Just flashing back, we have since 2014, end of 2013, 2014 shipments ongoing. So it's just a 3 years time that it took on a global scale to more or less make more than 80% transformed to a completely different form factor, which has not been driven by an OEM, which has not been driven by any of the other players, which has been proactively driven and offered to MNOs as an innovation to manage their process costs, to ease their lives, to reduce complexity. And this is starting in the shops. If you think about training, this is starting in stock management. So this is really a massive value, let's say, fueled by a very small piece of plastics module and the chip. So I think this is really something that that is great story, and we see the 2FF nearly as close to irrelevance meanwhile. So we will see some minor shipments only happening in the future to come, which makes also for sure, which reduces complexity. Next page. Following up on the information that has been required by you in the last sessions already, we have, even though not usually doing any forecasts on a quantitative level, we have very clearly indicated last year already that we see just derived from the countries and the use cases we are confronted with from MNOs, but also from other players, the M2M thing just on the starting line. And from the 2015 to 2016, 50% growth, we see now a doubling of the growth rate. And a very important thing you have to notice here is that this is only MFF2. So it's a QFN8, as you also sometimes hear it in the reports, which is the soldered form factor. So that's the parts of our shipments that we can be sure of that they are happening and ending in M2M applications. Might be cars, might be logistics, might be factories, might be other use cases in the industry environment. So this means that the M2M business is for sure much bigger because also a TomTom where you plug in a SIM, which is not an MMF2, would be counted as to an M2M case, which is for sure not part of the growth rates we are seeing here. So story to continue, and I can already tell you today that there's such an amount of things we are invited to contribute with ideas, setups, and process perspectives that I think this is just the start of the story. Please one further. I don't see need for you to go through the lines. I just asked for the inclusion of this slide because we just want to highlight a misunderstanding which happens again and again. I see this also on the conferences. Very many also specialists mix up SIM, eSIM with the topic of form factor. So many people think that the eSIM always has to be a solderable device into another device, but this is definitely not the case. So really, please note that there is a plug SIM history with a one subscription, with a remote manageability of services and so on, which can be removable and soldered, but this remains true also for the eSIM. So the eSIM definition, that's really something very important to underline, is just that you can not only manage the services remotely that have been somehow predefined on the card, but you can more or less run the updates of the operating system. You can share sensitive data, application subscriptions, and this always along the lines of the GSMA and global platform specifications. So don't mix up the form factor with eSIM and SIM. I think that's a very important take that we need to make sure that it's followed in the future, because it's confusing a lot of stakeholders in the industry and neighborhood industries. Next page, please. In the intro slide, I gave you the indication that we saw a turnaround, and I also saw this happening in a lot of meetings, that in the past, the main stakeholder, main profiter of SIM was the guys that wanted to have secure authentication, which means securing connectivity and allowing network access only for those that pay their bill and that are allowed to do so and share their data or voice via the network. What we see more and more, and where we even see the situation that is going vice versa, is that for sure with the increasing vulnerability of society, security is getting more and more in the forefront. So we see more and more discussion where the SIM, as with all its features as a dedicated hardware token that is able to store keys, that is able to really be protected separate from the device, is having the security proposition and brings the connectivity in addition, which is a massive strength in days where you try to connect selling automates, where you try to connect doors, where you try to. So it's also about, let's say, turning it around and remembering and underlining the thing that security might be in the forefront, and the more or less connectivity comes with it. While we have seen in the last 20 to 30 years always the other discussion. And security then means security not only from the B2B perspective, but also from the user's perspective. And you can imagine that this means a lot of interest, a lot of potential for all kinds of use cases that are not necessarily only industry use cases. Next, please. This is summing up on the eSIM part, and maybe before I deep dive, just to highlight the topic of brands here. So last year we would have seen, I would say, 1/3 of the brands, and you see that it's really relevant brands, it's really relevant companies looking into it. Partly we see even regulatory things like the eCall and the GLONASS topic, which is for sure, let's say, giving always jump starts to rollouts. So the equal stuff is something that will be mandatory, meaning that emergency calls have to be possible for all new cars from the 31st of March 2018. And this is for sure something that where you see always stepwise jumps in the shipment curves. And we will see this, let's say, also definitely in other continents and other countries. It's just a starting point. And for sure, we can ask the question, will regulation also at some point of time make up their minds regarding security? That's something that will be very interesting to look for and watch out. And you see that the use cases part is unlimited. Just let me mention one thing. We have, let's say, been asked fairly a lot of times now, and we are striving for it, to share details on the eSIM numbers. The situation there is we have a legal counsel that consults us to keep in line with the antitrust regulations, and they currently forbid us to share details because they simply say we need a critical level per member reporting information, and we need a major share of members adding these amounts of data to have really a kind of intransparency towards the contributors of the numbers. And as you know, this is currently in build up, and as soon as we get green light there, we will also be able to share the details. If you see on the next page, the details that we definitely wanted to share, because there is no issue in doing this, is that meanwhile we have 9 sites for the eSIM personalization and data processing globally available and operational. And you know that thus UP and thus SM, the box in the middle, is more or less the representation of accreditation streams that are promoted and more or less made public by GSMA for, on one side, the data processing and eSIM personalization process, and on the other side, for really the downloading process of subscriptions to the respective tokens in devices. So the capacity there is significant. The test tools and everything that is required to really bring use cases end-to-end to life and see that also SLAs are followed and properly executed also there. So it's a very good track record how we improve to bring eSIM use cases alive. And as said, we will report details as soon as we can and have the freedom to do so. Next, please. I mentioned quickly in the beginning of the presentation that a lot of players are meanwhile requesting us to be part of developing stories for the end users and for their B2B customers. And you see here, I don't know why the brand signals are not showing up here, the symbols. On the left side, we have the Microsoft quote from Shai Godai, who said, for our always connected PC strategy and storyline, we see definitely eSIM as one of the key technologies, and reason for this definitely being that it's convenient for the consumer, especially if you have let's say changing network situations, changing coverage situations. There's a lot of use cases that you can think of also quality-wise. And then from the enterprise perspective, as that this is very often the perspectives, convenience from the consumers. The enterprise perspective very often puts in the forefront security and risk mitigation aspects. So both very valid aspects from a fairly, let's say, aggressive consumer and B2B device manufacturer. On the right side, we see Orange as a classical MNO representative who says we want to improve customer experience. And I think that's something we see all around, that the myriad of connected devices We really see a lot of them. It's watches. It's very often I see here people in my company running around with 2 or 3 phones. That's nothing that really is desirable, and which really means it's a convenient story. So there's a huge potential. I could imagine that a lot of you have been visiting Mobile World Congress, and a very nice use case, I think it's a very compelling one, is the BMW use case that has been presented, where you see the guy boarding the car, having, let's say, more or less transferred his subscription to the car to be able to use all the schemes, all the contract frameworks in the car without, let's say, any kind of having to apply for an additional subscription, having to do an additional contract, because a lot of hotspots are currently unused in the cars. BMW have a huge chunk of their cars are shipped meanwhile with hotspots, and they perceive a lot of hotspots unused because it's so complex. Nobody wants to have an additional contract and so on. So it's really something that is relevant and matters. Next page. Yeah, and with this, we are on the first part concluding. Maybe flashlights on some of the key messages. We are really happy to see the market growing. We still think that this will continue. It's very difficult to see how fast it will continue to grow. But as said, the number of use cases we are currently discussing with a lot of really good players is unlimited. And then for sure we need security, and we see meanwhile not connectivity with security, but security with connectivity that is in the discussions. M2M or IoT, depending on if you put the consumer first or the industry, is definitely something where you see a lot of crazy numbers in billions and trillions and 20 or 30. So that is something where at least a certain share of it will also contribute to the demand on the SIM side. Some regulatory and process issues, giving a little bit of a break in some countries, depending on the maturity of the country and the infrastructural situation. These issues are being fixed sooner or later, and people get used to the process changes. Triple SIM, a clear success story, 80% within 4 years, driven by the industry without demand from any of the stakeholders in the market, is really something where we see it's a question how you do it, and not only that you do it. eSIM deployments kicking up on a very broad scale from many big brands requested, and delivering advantages not only for operators, MNOs, and having a cost impact and CapEx or OpEx reduction impact, but also really providing measurable profits and values for end consumers and business customers. Overall, I think the amount of future growth opportunities has never been so promising as today. The security proposition in the forefront is a very, let's say, a relevant one. And we see with major technical steps like 5G, a lot of also, let's say, basic topics that request SIM cards and eSIM cards to play a role in the connectivity and security field also in the future. And that's my summary of 2017 for you. And with this, I would like to hand over to Leanne. Thanks so far for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Stefan. Well, before we move on to the Q&A session, and I'm conscious that we are almost bumping up against our 40 minutes for this, but I think it's important that we do try and squeeze in at least a few questions. I just want to remind everybody that this webinar is the first public outing of this data. So thank you very much for joining us. SIM-Alliance will be publishing a press release tomorrow morning to announce these SIM shipment figures. And from tomorrow lunchtime, both this webinar, the audio recording, along with the slides and the public and the press release, will both be publicly available on the Sim Alliance website. So feel free to log on if you need to. To thank you for attending though, once we've finished today's webinar session, the comms team will send all attendees, all analyst and media attendees, the press release, which is embargoed until tomorrow, and a PDF of the presentation slides in order that you get this information in advance of the general press release dispatch. So thank you very much in advance for respecting the embargo. If you've got any further questions on the data once the webinar closes, please feel free to address them to the Sim Alliance comms team. You can see some contact details for Catherine here up on the slide in front of you. Now, if we can move on to the Q&A session, that would be wonderful. I can see that we've had a number of questions in throughout the course of the webinar. So I'll focus initially on the ones that I think will be of most interest to most people. So Stefan, the first question, somebody here has acknowledged that while we don't make projections, they realise Sim Alliance doesn't make projections on market figures, but they're interested in knowing what the general outlook for the future SIM market is.
Yeah, good question. Well, in principle, I think that it has never been different. We didn't forecast quantitative values. And I think, at least indicatively, I have in some points of this presentation also qualitatively referred to the perspectives we generically see either from the members themselves or as an industry in total. And you can also see this on Mobile World Congress. You can see this on all kinds of conferences. But very quickly summarized, and let's say coming back to also the topics I mentioned in the presentation, the authentication topic is something that will remain relevant. We have seen with the liaison statement of GSMA together with many operators towards ETSI that the decision has been taken to decouple IUICC, for example, from the UICC, and to start, at least for the 5G phase 1, with a SIM card that is 5G compliant. The details are still to be defined, but as a matter of fact, this is now decided and set. So this is, I think, a very good indication that the assets are well understood, which are not only security in the authentication process, but which is going beyond to security of services, to security of data, and maybe also to security of certain new things that are required, like firmware updates and so on. So that's, I think, that's one of the key things that is very clear and transparent in the market that gives a positive outlook. Then we have definitely also aspects like the use case discussion. We see a lot of use cases. We see a lot of players that meanwhile have understood that security is at the forefront. Connectivity plays a big role, and secure connectivity in combination with secure services is one of the key topics. And then in addition, and I think that has been worked out in many sessions now, we have the asset that happen beyond form factors that are still of extreme relevance and will even be more relevant in the future, which is together with the MNOs, MVNOs, global reach. So I wouldn't know any alternative to get in 2020, 2019 globally available security tokens that allow for secure authentication, secured services and data, and are compatible, let's say, interoperable and certifiable. So we can have a jump start here, and I think that's a very important argument. And to me, it at least provides fairly good outlook perspectives.
Thank you, Stefan. We have had another question asked, and I believe, well, you covered this briefly during the course of the presentation, but it might just be worth explaining this again. Someone's asked the question why we're not reporting eSIM shipments.
Yeah, I am asking the same questions again and again, and my colleagues too, because we would like to do so. It's so that at least the European antitrust regulation foresees a certain majority of stakeholders that need to provide data to grant neutrality. and then the data needs to reach certain limits. Currently, we have the situation that unfortunately we are benchmarked at extremely high volumes. We don't see this adequate. We are fighting for it to get approvals. I think it will be possible to report them short term, but we have to wait for the legal advisors to give us green lights. Otherwise, we would have different discussions that we want to avoid. So we will do it. We are, let's say, pushing for it. It's not yet clear when this will be, but I'm fairly optimistic. By then, we try to work around, as indicated in the presentation, with a lot of other information to make it clear how the trend is going and what you can expect once quantities are shareable.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Looking at the clock, I think we've probably got time for one more question. Does Similites expect the bigger market in the future to be for security with the eSIM and the embedded secure element, or for connectivity? Is that a question that you can answer, Stefan?
Yeah, definitely. I would answer is, I think I cannot give you numbers, but I would answer it in the way I tried to indicate already. In the past, at least on the mobility side, we always, and you know it yourself, everybody who has a smartphone, I think, knows it itself. If you are not an expert of the industry, you just plug the thing in and then you have connection. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. As long as we have the proposition of connectivity there, it's for sure something that is of extreme relevance in future. With now having security in addition, the big difference is that security now matters also for stakeholders beyond the pure connectivity proposition, where I definitely see massive potential, which I think can only be underestimated. So that's my stand here, and I think everybody on the call can ask the question to himself: how relevant is security to me? Secure service, secure data. We hear messages every day nearly. Meanwhile. And that's, I think, the strength. Ecosystem ready to go, global reach, connectivity there, and in addition, the potential to do things that have been possible always, but that didn't play as big roles as they will in future.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stefan. Well, it's now 7 minutes over our allotted finish time. So thank you all very much for joining. We do very much appreciate you dialing in. We have taken a note of all of the questions that have been submitted on the session this afternoon. And as I said at the beginning, we will respond to everybody individually. If you can give us a few days to do that, we would appreciate it. Thanks again for your participation today. Thank you to Stefan. Have a good day, and thanks again for joining us.